The recruitment office smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Ryan Walsh sat in the plastic chair, filling out forms that asked questions he didn't understand. Military service record average. Combat experience basic. Special skills. Can open pickle jars without tools. He wasn't sure if that last one was relevant, but the form had a lot of blank spaces. Next, the voice belonged to a tired-looking woman behind bulletproof glass. Ryan approached with his paperwork. "I'm here about the special assignment posting," he said, sliding the forms through the slot. She looked at his file, then at him, then back at the file. "You understand this is for the Galactic Defense Coalition Exchange Program?" "Yeah, it said interesting assignment and travel opportunities. I've been stuck at the same base for 3 years. Mr. Walsh, this program involves training with alien species on what they classify as an extreme survival world. Most applicants require advanced psychological screening and enhanced physical conditioning." Ryan shrugged. "I went camping in Alaska last winter."
"How bad could it be?"
The woman stared at him for a long moment, then stamped his forms. "Report to Transport Bay 7 tomorrow at Oro 600. Don't blame me if you come back in a box." 3 months later, Ryan found himself on a transport ship that looked like someone had crossed a submarine with a luxury hotel. His fellow passengers were nothing like the aliens he'd seen in movies. They were real, breathing beings with their own mannerisms and habits. Commander Thal was a 7-foot-tall reptilian creature who never seemed to blink. His scales shifted color slightly when he was thinking, which was most of the time. He wore a uniform that looked like it cost more than Ryan's annual salary and carried himself like someone who had never been wrong about anything important. Dr. Finn resembled a dolphin that had learned to walk upright and wear clothes. She spoke through a translation device that made everything sound slightly underwater. Her specialty was xenobiology, and she had spent the last 50 years studying survival techniques across 12 different planetary environments. Captain Vore looked like a praying mantis crossed with a bodybuilder. His forearms moved independently, and his compound eyes could apparently see in 17 different spectrums of light. He had won something called the Mantari War Games 5 times running, and had never lost a single soldier under his command. Lieutenant Kim was the strangest of all. She appeared to be made of living crystal that refracted light in impossible ways. When she moved, she chimed softly like wind through glass tubes. Her people, the Solari, were known throughout the galaxy as master tacticians who could calculate battlefield probabilities in real time. Then there was Ryan. Human. Brown hair, brown eyes, average height, slightly out of regulation on his last fitness test. He had joined the Marines because college was expensive, and his recruiter had promised he'd see the world. Technically, he supposed this counted. "Tell me, Human Ryan," Commander Thal said during their first group meeting. "What survival training has your species provided for this mission?" "Standard stuff," Ryan replied. "Basic wilderness survival, cold weather training, desert operations. Did a course on edible plants once. The other species exchanged looks that didn't require translation." Dr. Finn made a note on her data pad that sounded distinctly concerned. "Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of our destination," Captain Vore said, his translator giving his voice a metallic edge. "Mortis 7 is classified as a Class 9 Deathworld. The gravity alone will crush most biological forms. The atmosphere requires specialized breathing apparatus. The local fauna are uniformly predatory and highly aggressive." "And that's just the first day," Lieutenant Kem added, her crystalline voice tinkling with what might have been amusement. "The weather patterns include acid precipitation, electrical storms that can fry most technology, and temperature swings that have been known to shatter military-grade equipment." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like camping in Scotland, I beg your pardon." Dr. Finn leaned forward, her translation device humming with confusion. "Scottish Highlands. Went there on leave once. Rained sideways for 3 days straight. Couldn't start a fire. And something that might have been a sheep kept trying to eat my tent. This sounds similar but with better weather reports." Commander Thal's scales shifted to a deep purple color. "Human Ryan, I believe you do not fully comprehend the severity of our situation. Mortis 7 has a mortality rate of 47% for fully equipped, technologically enhanced military personnel." "That's better than the highway I grew up on," Ryan said cheerfully. "What's the food situation like?" The question seemed to break something in the group dynamic. Captain Vore's forearms gestured, and what Ryan was learning meant either extreme agitation or the insect equivalent of throwing hands in the air. Dr. Finn made several more concerned notes. Lieutenant Kem's crystalline structure dimmed noticeably. The food situation, Commander Thal said slowly, is that most organic matter on Mortis 7 is either poisonous, carnivorous, or both. Standard protocol requires sealed nutrition packets and purified water supplies. Right, so like MREs, but probably better tasting, Ryan said. Do they have hot sauce in space? Because I packed some, but I wasn't sure about customs regulations for interplanetary travel. Hot sauce? Dr. Finn's translation device made a sound like a confused whale. Spicy food enhancer. Makes everything taste better. Pretty standard human thing. The meeting devolved from there. Ryan found himself answering increasingly detailed questions about human dietary habits, environmental tolerances, and survival instincts. Each answer seemed to make his fellow trainees more concerned rather than less. Let me understand this correctly, Lieutenant Kem said finally, her crystal form now barely glowing. Your species regularly consumes plants that cause physical pain for pleasure? Hot peppers, yeah. Some people compete to see who can eat the spiciest ones. It's fun. And you intentionally expose yourselves to extreme temperatures for recreation? Saunas, ice fishing, desert hiking. Builds character. And you consider it normal to coexist with predatory animals? Dogs are descended from wolves, cats are just small tigers, and my neighbor has a pet snake. Pretty standard stuff. Commander Thal's scales had gone through several color changes and settled on a sickly yellow-green. Perhaps we should review the mission parameters once more. But Ryan was already thinking about other things. He wondered if the space food would be any good, whether the gravity would help or hurt his bad knee, and if anyone had remembered to pack playing cards for the downtime. This was shaping up to be the most interesting assignment he'd ever had. The transport ship hummed quietly through space, carrying them toward Mortis 7 in what the galaxy considered the ultimate test of survival. Ryan Walsh, completely unaware that he was about to redefine several species' understanding of the word dangerous, settled in for the journey and wondered if anyone would mind if he made some coffee. The landing shuttle shook like a paint mixer full of rocks. Through the small porthole, Ryan could see Mortis 7 growing larger, its surface a swirling mass of angry clouds, jagged mountains, and what looked like several different weather systems having a fight. Lightning crackled between the clouds in colors that hurt to look at directly. Final approach to Surface Base Alpha, the pilot announced through the intercom. His voice carried the tone of someone who had made this trip many times and never gotten used to it. All personnel prepare for hostile environment protocols. Around him, Ryan's fellow trainees were going through pre-landing checklists that looked more complicated than launching a space shuttle. Commander Thal was sealing himself into what appeared to be a full environmental suit with its own life support system. Dr. Finn was testing a breathing apparatus that covered most of her head and made her look like a deep-sea diver. Captain Vore was strapping on an exoskeleton that doubled his already impressive size, while Lieutenant Kem had activated some kind of energy shield that made the air around her shimmer like heat waves. Ryan checked his own gear. Standard issue uniform, combat boots, and a backpack containing basic supplies. He had left most of his heavy equipment in storage, figuring he could always get it later if needed. Human Ryan, Commander Thal's voice came through his suit's external speakers. Where is your environmental protection? I've got a jacket, Ryan said, patting his backpack. Weather report said it might rain. The rain is sulfuric acid. Oh. Ryan considered this. Is it strong acid or just sort of acidic? Because I worked at a battery factory one summer and you get used to it. The shuttle touched down with a thud that rattled everyone's teeth. Through the porthole, Ryan could see the surface of Mortis 7 for the first time. It looked like someone had taken all the worst parts of every hostile environment on Earth and mixed them together, with a few things that Earth had been lucky enough to avoid. The gravity hit him the moment the airlock opened. It felt like someone had filled his backpack with bowling balls, but it wasn't unbearable. Heavy, sure, but he'd carried heavier loads during training exercises. The air tasted metallic and sharp like breathing in a thunderstorm, but his lungs adapted after a few breaths. Around him, his fellow trainees were struggling. Commander Thal's powered suit whined under the increased gravity load. Dr. Finn was breathing heavily through her apparatus, and even with mechanical assistance, each step looked like an effort. Captain Vore's exoskeleton was handling the gravity, but Ryan could see stress fractures already forming in the metal joints. Lieutenant Kem's energy shield flickered occasionally, and her crystal form seemed dimmer than usual. The base camp looked like a military installation designed by someone who expected to be attacked by the planet itself. Everything was reinforced, sealed, and built to withstand impacts that would level a normal building. Warning signs covered every surface, written in 12 different languages and 3 different mathematical systems. "Welcome to hell," muttered the base commander, a grizzled veteran from the Draknari military. "I'm Colonel Reeves. I've been running this nightmare for 6 months, and I've seen things that would make a combat medic quit and become a florist." He led them through the orientation briefing, which was less of a briefing and more of a very long list of things that could kill them. The local fauna included pack-hunting plants, predators that could phase through solid matter, insects the size of small aircraft, and something called a phase bear that could apparently teleport and had a taste for anything that moved. "The weather is equally hostile," Colonel Reeves continued. "Acid rain every Tuesday and Friday, electrical storms that can fry any unshielded electronics, temperature swings from -40 to +60 degrees Celsius sometimes within the same hour, and wind patterns that include actual tornadoes made of superheated plasma." Commander Thal's scales had gone a color that Ryan was learning meant deeply concerned. Dr. Finn was taking notes so rapidly that her datapad was smoking. Captain Vore had stopped moving entirely except for the occasional twitch of his antennae. Lieutenant Kem's crystal form was now barely visible, as if she was trying to fade out of existence entirely. "Questions?" Colonel Reeves asked. Ryan raised his hand. "Is there a cafeteria? And do you happen to have any hot sauce?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually preceded either laughter or violence. Colonel Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then checked his datapad. "You're the human," he said finally. "That's me. Son, the cafeteria is in Building C, but I should warn you that the food is designed for maximum nutrition and minimum taste. As for hot sauce," he paused, looking thoughtful. "Actually, yes. The previous human left behind a bottle of something called Carolina Reaper sauce, with a note saying it might be useful for equipment maintenance." "Perfect," Ryan said cheerfully. "When do we start the fun stuff?" "Fun stuff?" Colonel Reeves repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "Son, this is survival training. The objective is to not die." "Right, but what do we do for fun when we're not trying to not die?" The question seemed to break something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Ryan noticed that his fellow trainees were all staring at him, with expressions that ranged from horror to fascination. Colonel Reeves made a note on his datapad that looked distinctly medical in nature. "Let's start with a basic perimeter walk," the colonel said finally, "just to get everyone acclimated to the environment." The perimeter walk was where things got interesting. The moment they stepped outside the base's protective barriers, Mortis 7 made its intentions clear. The air itself seemed hungry, carrying sounds that suggested large, unfriendly things moving just out of sight. The ground was uneven and treacherous, with patches that looked solid, but gave way to reveal pits lined with something that moved and glistened unpleasantly. Commander Thal's environmental suit was working overtime, its air scrubbers running constantly and its radiation detectors clicking like an angry insect. Dr. Finn's breathing apparatus fogged up regularly, forcing her to stop and clear it. Captain Vore's exoskeleton was making concerning mechanical noises, and Lieutenant Kem's energy shield was flickering more frequently. Ryan, meanwhile, was looking around with the expression of someone seeing a new neighborhood for the first time. He had unzipped his jacket because the air felt pleasantly cool, and he was walking with the easy gait of someone taking a casual stroll. "The flora here is particularly aggressive," Colonel Reeves explained, pointing to what looked like a normal patch of grass. "Those are razor grass. Each blade can cut through military-grade body armor." "Neat," Ryan said, kneeling down to get a closer look. "It's like nature's version of a lawnmower blade." "Don't touch it," 3 voices shouted at once. "Oh, right." Ryan stood up, brushing off his knees. "Good thing I didn't lean on it." A sound like a steam engine mixed with a chainsaw echoed from the nearby tree line. Colonel Reeves immediately gestured for everyone to freeze. "Phase bear," he whispered. "Nobody move. They hunt by detecting motion and thermal signatures." Everyone went completely still. Ryan could hear his fellow trainees' breathing apparatus and mechanical systems running at minimum power. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the unmistakable noise of something very large moving through vegetation that was fighting back. Ryan stood perfectly still for about 30 seconds, then turned his head slightly to get a better look at whatever was making the noise. "I said don't move," Colonel Reeves hissed. "Sorry," Ryan whispered back. "I've just never seen a phase bear before." "Do they actually phase, or is it more like camouflage?" The question was answered when a creature the size of a small truck materialized 20 feet away, apparently having teleported from somewhere else entirely. It looked like someone had crossed a grizzly bear with a pile of living shadow and given it too many teeth. Its eyes were the color of fresh blood, and when it opened its mouth, reality seemed to bend slightly around its fangs. Ryan's fellow trainees collectively stopped breathing. Several pieces of equipment shut down entirely rather than risk making noise. "Wow," Ryan said in what he probably thought was a whisper, but was actually audible to everyone present. "That's actually pretty cool. Does it hunt in packs, or is it more of a solitary predator?" The phase bear turned its attention directly to Ryan, tilted its massive head, and made a sound like a question mark carved out of nightmares. Ryan waved. 2 weeks into the training program, Colonel Reeves had developed a nervous twitch in his left eye and had started requesting additional psychiatric support staff. The official incident reports were stacking up like cordwood, each one stranger than the last. Day 3 had involved crossing what the locals called the Singing Valley, where the ground was riddled with gas pockets that exploded randomly with enough force to launch a person into orbit. Standard protocol required full bomb disposal suits, seismic detectors, and a minimum team of 12 specialists with emergency medical support on standby. Commander, Thal had needed 3 days to recalibrate his environmental suit after the gas explosions kept triggering his emergency protocols. Dr. Finn had suffered what her species considered a minor nervous breakdown when her seismic detector started reading like a disco ball. Captain Vor's exoskeleton had been repaired 4 times, and Lieutenant Kem had requested to be transferred to a different galaxy entirely. Ryan had packed a lunch. "The key is to listen to the ground," he had explained while the others prepared their equipment. "It makes different sounds before it explodes, sort of like how ice creaks before it breaks, but with more sulfur." He had walked across the valley eating a peanut butter sandwich, pausing occasionally to change direction when the ground made what he described as grumpy noises. Behind him, the full military expedition had followed his path exactly, their equipment useless compared to what Ryan called paying attention. Day 7 had been the forest of aggressive trees, where the local plant life had evolved past photosynthesis and into active predation. The trees could move their branches fast enough to impale passing creatures, and the undergrowth was collectively hostile in ways that violated several laws of botany. The standard approach required flame units, chainsaw teams, and enough firepower to level a small city. What they got instead was Ryan asking if anyone had a pocket knife he could borrow. "I just want to get a cutting from that one," he had said, pointing to a tree that was actively trying to stab a passing bird. "It would look great in my apartment back home." When Dr. Finn had explained that the tree was trying to kill the bird, Ryan had nodded thoughtfully and said that his grandmother had roses that were similarly aggressive, and you just had to show them who was boss. He had walked into the forest like he was visiting a public park. The trees had attacked him exactly once, received what could only be described as a very firm talking to, and had then left him alone for the rest of the expedition. He had emerged 3 hours later with several plant cuttings, a pocket full of interesting seeds, and a detailed mental map of the safest paths through the forest. By day 10, the other trainees had started following Ryan around like ducklings, not because they trusted his judgment, but because staying near him seemed to be the only way to avoid having the planet actively try to murder them. "I don't understand it," Dr. Finn confided to her personal log. "Human Ryan approaches every lethal scenario as if it were a minor inconvenience. Yesterday, when we encountered the electric eels in the Screaming River, he asked if anyone had brought fishing line. The Screaming River had been the worst challenge yet. The water was home to creatures that looked like electric eels but were the size of subway trains and generated enough electricity to power a small city. The current was strong enough to sweep away a tank. The water was acidic enough to dissolve most metals, and the whole river screamed constantly with the voices of everything that had ever died in it. Standard crossing procedure required a portable bridge, full electrical insulation suits, and a support team with emergency medical facilities. The operation typically took 6 hours and had a 15% casualty rate even under ideal conditions. Ryan had looked at the river for approximately 30 seconds, then started taking off his boots. "What are you doing?" Commander Thal had asked, his scales now permanently stuck on the color that meant impending doom. "Going for a swim," Ryan had replied. "Water looks fine. Bit noisy, but I grew up near a highway. The water will dissolve you." "Nah, it's not that acidic. See how it's not eating through the rocks on the shore? That means it's probably just mildly corrosive. Like swimming in a chlorinated pool but with more screaming. The eels will electrocute you. Only if I bother them. Electric eels back home are pretty chill if you don't go grabbing at them. These aren't normal electric eels. Sure they are. Just bigger. Probably means they're older and more experienced, so they'll be smarter about avoiding unnecessary conflict." Ryan had waded into the water while his fellow trainees watched in horror. The massive electric eels had surfaced to investigate, taken one look at him and apparently decided he wasn't worth the effort. He had swum across the river in a leisurely breaststroke, pausing in the middle to wave at his teammates and point out what he thought might be interesting fish. The return trip had been even worse for everyone's nerves. Ryan had convinced one of the giant eels to give him a ride by offering it part of his energy bar. He had arrived at the far shore sitting on the back of a creature that could have powered half the galaxy, scratching it behind what might have been ears and discussing the river's ecosystem with the air of someone giving a nature documentary. "The screaming is just acoustics," he had explained when he rejoined the group. "All that electrical activity creates vibrations in the water, and the rock formations amplify them. It's actually pretty interesting from an engineering perspective." By day 14, Colonel Reeves had started sending daily reports to Galactic Command that read less like military assessments and more like appeals for psychiatric intervention. "Request immediate consultation with xenopsychology specialists," he had written. "Human subject continues to treat Class 9 Deathworld environment as recreational opportunity. Yesterday observed subject attempting to domesticate local predator species. When questioned, subject stated he was making friends with the neighborhood. Recommend full psychological evaluation of entire human species." The psychological evaluation had arrived in the form of Dr. Marina Santos, a human psychiatrist who had been hastily recruited from Earth's United Nations liaison office. She had stepped off the transport shuttle, taken one look around Mortis 7, and made the same comment that was becoming depressingly familiar. "Oh, good," she had said, shouldering her backpack. "It's not as bad as I thought it would be." Colonel Reeves had stared at her for a long moment, then updated his report to Galactic Command. "Require immediate extraction. All human personnel display identical pathological lack of self-preservation instincts. Recommend reclassification of human homeworld pending further investigation." But the training program continued. Because somewhere in the galaxy, the Void Swarm was still a threat, and the Galactic Defense Coalition still needed soldiers who could function in impossible environments. What they were discovering was that they already had them. They just hadn't realized that the humans they'd been dismissing as a minor species had evolved on a planet that made Mortis 7 look like a vacation resort. Ryan Walsh, completely unaware that he was in the process of redefining galactic understanding of survival training, was sitting by the campfire he'd built using local materials, roasting something that looked like a cross between a fish and a small dragon, and planning tomorrow's activities. "I heard there's a volcano about 50 miles north," he mentioned to Dr. Santos. "Want to go check it out? I've never seen an alien volcano before." Dr. Santos, who had spent the day cataloging the various ways that Mortis 7 could kill its inhabitants, looked up from her notes. "Is it active?" "Yeah, that's what makes it interesting." She made another note in her file. This one about the apparent human instinct to seek out additional danger when the current environment wasn't quite challenging enough. Somewhere in the distance, a pack of phase bears howled in harmony with what sounded like a tornado made of electricity. Ryan looked up hopefully. "Oh good," he said. "Sounds like the weather's getting interesting." Murder Canyon earned its name the old-fashioned way, by murdering things. Located in the northern quadrant of Mortis 7, it represented everything hostile about the planet concentrated into one convenient location. The rocks were carnivorous, the air was poisonous, and the local ecosystem had evolved beyond normal predator-prey relationships into something that could only be described as competitive. "Homicide. This is the final examination," Colonel Reeves announced to the assembled trainees. His nervous twitch had progressed to involve both eyes and most of his left cheek. 72 hours, minimal equipment, individual survival exercise. If you complete this, you graduate from the program. The equipment allowance was deliberately sparse: basic shelter materials, 3 days of emergency rations, a water purification device, and one personal item of their choosing. Standard military doctrine suggested that anyone attempting Murder Canyon should have a full support team, satellite communication, and emergency extraction capabilities on standby. Commander Thal had chosen a military-grade survival beacon as his personal item. His scales had achieved a color that didn't exist in any known spectrum and seemed to hurt people's eyes when they looked directly at it. Dr. Finn had selected an emergency medical kit and was breathing so rapidly through her apparatus that she was fogging up the inside of her helmet. Captain Vor's personal item was a portable weapons array, and his forearms were twitching independently in what his species considered a sign of extreme agitation. Lieutenant Kem had gone almost completely transparent and was humming at a frequency that made nearby equipment malfunction. Ryan had brought a fishing rod. "Human Ryan," Dr. Santos said. "Are you certain that's your best choice for survival equipment?" "Well, the briefing mentioned there was a stream running through the canyon," Ryan replied, checking his tackle box. "Figured I might as well try the local fishing while I'm there. Plus, if the water's clean enough for fish, it's probably safe to drink." Dr. Santos made a note that looked increasingly concerned. She had spent 3 weeks on Mortis 7 conducting psychological evaluations, and her preliminary report to Earth contained phrases like possible evolutionary divergence and recommend immediate anthropological study of human development patterns. "The stream in Murder Canyon isn't water," Colonel Reeves said. "It's liquid mercury mixed with dissolved uranium and what our scientists believe might be liquefied malice." "Oh." Ryan considered this. "Well, the fishing rod's still useful. Good for reaching things you don't want to touch directly." The drop-off point was a plateau overlooking Murder Canyon that offered an excellent view of why the place had such a terrible reputation. The canyon walls were lined with stone formations that moved when nobody was looking directly at them. The bottom was shrouded in mist that periodically screamed. The sky above the canyon was a different color than the sky everywhere else, suggesting that local atmospheric conditions had given up on physics entirely. "Individual drops will be made at random locations throughout the canyon," Colonel Reeves explained. "Your objective is simple: survive until pickup. Do not attempt to contact each other. Do not attempt to leave the canyon boundaries. Do not attempt to feed or domesticate the local wildlife." The last instruction was delivered while looking directly at Ryan, who seemed disappointed. Commander Thal went first, his environmental suit already running diagnostics that suggested imminent system failure. His drop pod disappeared into the mist with a sound like screaming metal. Dr. Finn followed, her breathing apparatus working overtime, and her medical training apparently warring with her survival instincts. Her pod vanished with what might have been a whimper. Captain Vor's descent was accompanied by the sound of his weapons array charging up, preparing for immediate combat. His pod hit the canyon floor with a thud that echoed off the carnivorous rocks. Lieutenant Kem's pod simply faded from view as it descended, her crystalline form apparently trying to phase out of existence entirely. "Last drop," Colonel Reeves announced, trying not to look at Ryan directly. "Any final questions?" "Yeah," Ryan said, settling into his pod with his fishing rod and backpack. "What's the local time zone down there?" "I want to make sure I'm up early enough to catch the sunrise, sir." Pod door sealed with a hiss that sounded distinctly like a sigh. Murder Canyon was everything the reputation suggested, and several things it didn't. The moment Ryan's pod touched down, the local environment began what could only be described as an aggressive welcome committee. The ground beneath his feet was warm and seemed to pulse with a heartbeat. The air tasted like copper pennies and existential dread. Something that might have been wind carried sounds that suggested the canyon was having a conversation with itself in a language made entirely of threats. Ryan looked around with the expression of someone seeing their vacation rental for the first time. It wasn't exactly what he'd expected, but it had character. The first order of business was shelter. The pod was designed to serve as temporary housing, but Ryan could see that the local rocks were already eyeing it with what appeared to be appetite. Better to establish a more permanent base before things got weird. He found a spot near what the briefing materials had optimistically called a stream. The liquid flowing through it was indeed mercury-based. but it was also flowing, which meant it was probably following some kind of natural course. In Ryan's experience, natural water sources were usually associated with other useful things, even if the water itself wasn't immediately drinkable. The fishing rod turned out to be immediately useful, not for fishing but for testing things before touching them directly. The local rocks were indeed carnivorous, but they were also slow and appeared to have poor eyesight. As long as he moved predictably and didn't act like prey, they seemed content to ignore him. Setting up camp took about an hour. Ryan had learned to build shelters in environments that ranged from Arctic tundra to desert sand, and Murder Canyon was just another variation on the theme. The key was working with the environment rather than against it, and finding ways to make the local hostility work in your favor. The carnivorous rocks, for example, made excellent perimeter security. Anything trying to sneak up on his campsite would have to get past them first, and they were apparently territorial enough to attack other predators. The screaming mist provided excellent camouflage and background noise. The strange gravitational anomalies in certain parts of the canyon could be used for water collection if you knew where to place your containers. By sunset, Ryan had a functioning campsite, a reliable source of filtered water, and a basic understanding of the local predator patterns. He had also discovered that the liquefied malice in the stream was an excellent insect repellent when used in small quantities. Meanwhile, his fellow trainees were discovering that Murder Canyon had earned its reputation through dedicated effort. Commander Thal's environmental suit had suffered a complete breakdown within the first 6 hours. His emergency beacon was functioning, but the canyon's electromagnetic field was scrambling his signal into what sounded like a distress call, sung in 3-part harmony by a choir of dying robots. He had barricaded himself inside his drop pod and was rationing his emergency air supply while hallucinating conversations with his childhood imaginary friends. Dr. Finn's breathing apparatus had clogged with something that might have been pollen but moved, like it had opinions about the situation. She was experiencing what her species considered a complete psychological breakdown, compounded by the fact that her medical training kept trying to diagnose her own symptoms, while her survival instincts suggested that running away screaming might be the best available option. Captain 4 had engaged his weapons array against what he perceived as multiple hostile contacts, only to discover that he was fighting his own shadow, as interpreted by the canyon's unusual lighting conditions. His exoskeleton was running low on power. His ammunition was depleted, and he was beginning to suspect that the canyon was personally offended by his presence. Lieutenant Kem had achieved complete transparency and was communicating only in frequencies that caused mild headaches in anyone who tried to listen. Her tactical analysis capabilities had completely overloaded when presented with an environment where the normal rules of cause and effect were apparently optional. Ryan, unaware that his fellow trainees were experiencing various forms of survival-induced madness, was enjoying the most peaceful evening he'd had since arriving on Mortis 7. The local wildlife was certainly unusual, but it followed predictable patterns once you figured out the rules. The canyon's acoustic properties were actually quite pleasant once you got used to them, creating a natural sound system that was almost musical. He had caught something for dinner using his fishing rod and a piece of his emergency rations as bait. The creature looked like a cross between a trout and a small dragon, but it tasted like chicken and had no apparent interest in eating him back. The cooking fire was built using materials that burned with colors not found in any normal spectrum, but they produced good heat and kept the local scavengers at a respectful distance. As night fell over Murder Canyon, Ryan Walsh sat by his impossible campfire, writing in the journal he'd brought along to document his experiences. The entry for day 1 read, "Interesting local geology. Fishing is good. Should have brought marshmallows." Somewhere in the darkness, something howled with the voice of crystallized despair. Ryan looked up hopefully, wondering if it might be friendly. The emergency extraction call came at 0300 hours, 47 hours into what was supposed to be a 72-hour exercise. Colonel Reeves received it while staring at biometric readouts that suggested his trainees were either dead, insane, or had somehow transcended the normal boundaries of biological existence. Commander Thal's vital signs showed stress patterns that exceeded his species' known physiological limits. His heart rate had achieved frequencies typically associated with hummingbirds, and his brain activity suggested he was experiencing either enlightenment or a complete psychological break, possibly both. Dr. Finn's readings indicated that she had stopped breathing in any recognizable pattern and was instead producing what could only be described as aquatic sobbing sounds. Her stress hormones were at levels that should have been lethal, and her body temperature kept fluctuating between hypothermia and fever. Captain Vor's exoskeleton was transmitting error messages in 17 different languages, including 3 that his species had never encountered before. His biological signs suggested he was fighting a war against an enemy that existed entirely in his own mind, and losing badly. Lieutenant Kem had stopped registering on most sensors entirely. The few readings they could get suggested she had achieved a quantum state that allowed her to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, none of which appeared to be entirely in the same reality as everyone else. Then there was Ryan Walsh. His biometric readings showed that he was asleep. Not just asleep, but sleeping deeply and peacefully, with vital signs that suggested he was more relaxed than he had been at any point since arriving on Mortis 7. His stress hormones were at baseline levels. His heart rate was consistent with someone taking a pleasant nap. His brain activity indicated he was probably dreaming about something enjoyable. "Sir," the medical technician said, checking his instruments for the 3rd time, "I think there might be an error in the human's monitoring equipment." "What kind of error?" Colonel Reeves asked, though he was beginning to suspect the error was in their understanding of humans rather than their equipment. According to these readings, human Ryan's stress levels have been decreasing steadily since the exercise began. His body temperature is stable, his breathing is regular, and his brain chemistry suggests he's having fun. The extraction team found Commander Thal curled up in his drop pod, having constructed what appeared to be a religious shrine to his environmental suit's air recycling system. He was speaking in tongues and had covered the walls with mathematical equations that, when viewed from the right angle, might have been either profound insights into the nature of reality or really elaborate doodles. Dr. Finn was discovered attempting to perform surgery on a rock formation that she had convinced herself was a patient. Her medical training had collided with her survival instincts in ways that violated several principles of both medicine and physics. She was treating the rock for conditions that didn't exist while simultaneously trying to hide from her own medical equipment. Captain Vor was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a shadow that moved independently of any light source. His 4 arms were moving in patterns that would have been impressive if there had been an actual opponent present. He had apparently defeated several other shadows earlier in the fight, based on his victory dances and the dramatic poses he struck between combat rounds. Lieutenant Kem was found in a state that could only be described as aggressively not present. She was visible but existed in a constant state of about to disappear, communicating only through color changes that induced mild seizures in anyone who looked directly at her. Her tactical assessments of the situation were being transmitted in mathematical formulas that described impossible geometries. Ryan was discovered sitting by a campfire that shouldn't have been possible, cooking breakfast and watching the sunrise. His camp was organized, clean, and appeared to be operating under different physical laws than the rest of Murder Canyon. The carnivorous rocks in his immediate vicinity had arranged themselves into what looked suspiciously like garden decorations. "Morning," he said cheerfully as the extraction team approached. "Perfect timing. I was just making coffee. Anyone want some?" The extraction team, all of whom were wearing full hazmat suits and carrying enough firepower to level a small building, stared at him for a long moment. "Sir," the team leader said carefully, "are you aware that you've been alone in Murder Canyon for 47 hours? Yeah, it's been great. Really peaceful once you get used to the local customs. Did you know the screaming mist is actually just thermal vents? Makes a sound like wind chimes if you listen to it right. Sir, this environment is classified as lethally hostile to all known forms of life. Well, sure, if you fight it, but most places are dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. This is just more honest about it than most." The psychological evaluation that followed was conducted by Dr. Santos, 3 xenopsychology specialists, a combat stress expert, and someone whose job title was apparently theoretical survival consultant. Ryan sat in the interview room, drinking coffee and answering questions with the air of someone discussing a pleasant vacation. "Ryan," Dr. Santos began, "can you describe your experience in Murder Canyon?" "Sure. Good fishing, interesting wildlife, excellent acoustics. The gravitational anomalies took some getting used to, but once you figure out the pattern, they're actually pretty useful. Oh, and the local equivalent of sunrise is beautiful. You don't see colors like that back home. Were you ever afraid? Ryan considered this seriously. Well, yeah, the first night I was worried I might have set up camp too close to the stream. The mercury content makes the soil a bit unstable, and I didn't want to wake up in a sinkhole. What about the hostile environment? The carnivorous rocks? The screaming mist? What about them? Didn't they seem dangerous to you? Everything's dangerous if you don't pay attention. Cars are dangerous, but people drive them every day. The ocean is dangerous, but people swim in it. This place is just more upfront about the risks. The xenopsychology specialist, a crystalline being from the Arcturus system, made a sound like breaking glass. Human Ryan, can you describe your homeworld's environmental conditions? Earth, pretty standard stuff. We've got deserts, mountains, oceans, forests, weather patterns, seasonal changes, the usual. What about dangerous wildlife? Oh, sure. Bears, wolves, big cats, sharks, poisonous snakes, spiders, jellyfish. Australia's got some really interesting stuff. Drop bears, box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopus, funnel web spiders. Then there's the microscopic stuff like bacteria and viruses that can kill you without you even knowing they're there. The specialist's crystalline structure was beginning to crack. And humans consider this normal? Well, yeah. I mean, you learn to avoid the dangerous stuff when you can, but it's all part of the ecosystem. Most of it won't bother you if you don't bother it. What about natural disasters? Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. Pretty standard geological activity. Oh, and avalanches if you're in the mountains. And flash floods in the desert. Blizzards if you're up north. The room fell silent except for the sound of several people updating their psychological assessment files. The combat stress expert was making notes that appeared to include the word impossible. Several times. Underlined heavily. Ryan, Dr. Santos said finally, do you understand that the Galactic Defense Coalition classifies Mortis 7 as a Class 9 Deathworld? Yeah, that seems about right. It's definitely more challenging than most places. And you find it pleasant? Well, sure. Good exercise, interesting scenery, new experiences. Plus it's quiet. No traffic, no crowds, no pollution. Just you and nature. Ryan, the theoretical survival consultant interrupted. What classification would you give your homeworld using the same scale? Ryan thought about this seriously. I don't know the exact criteria, but probably somewhere around Class 13? Maybe higher if you count the really dangerous places like the deep ocean or active volcano zones. Oh, and space. Space around Earth is pretty hostile if you don't have the right equipment. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually preceded either applause or existential crisis. In this case, it was definitely the latter. Excuse me, Dr. Santos said, standing up abruptly. I need to make a call. The call went directly to Galactic Defense Coalition Command, where it was transferred immediately to the Office of Strategic Assessment, then to Xenobiology, then to Philosophy, then to a department whose official title was Things That Shouldn't Be Possible But Apparently Are. By the end of the day, Ryan Walsh's psychological evaluation had been classified as a galactic security document, and Earth had been quietly moved to a list of planets that the galaxy preferred to think of as theoretical, rather than actual. Meanwhile, Ryan finished his coffee and asked if anyone wanted to see the photos he'd taken of the local wildlife. The official suspension of the Galactic Defense Coalition training program came with a memo that was simultaneously classified as top secret and filed under educational. Disasters, Colonel Reeves's final report, ran to 300 pages and included 17 different requests for psychiatric leave, early retirement, and reassignment to any location where the local environment operates according to recognizable physical laws. The memo announcing the suspension was brief. Due to unforeseen complications involving incompatible species psychology, the Mortis 7 training program is hereby terminated pending comprehensive review of participant selection criteria and environmental safety protocols. What the memo didn't mention was that half the participants were in intensive therapy, the base's entire supply of anxiety medication had been depleted, and the Galactic Defense Coalition's understanding of survival training had been fundamentally challenged by one human who packed lunch for extreme survival exercises. Ryan was sitting in what had been the base cafeteria, enjoying a sandwich and coffee, while the medical staff continued their efforts to restore his fellow trainees to something resembling functional awareness. Through the window, he could see the transport ships arriving to collect the remnants of what had once been the galaxy's most elite survival training program. Dr. Santos joined him at his table, carrying a datapad that contained preliminary findings from what was being called the Human Baseline Study. The study had been launched 3 days earlier, when someone in Galactic Command had asked the obvious question. If one human could treat a Class 9 Deathworld as a recreational opportunity, what did that say about the rest of their species? The results are in, she said, sitting down across from him. Earth has been reclassified. Oh? Ryan looked up from his sandwich. What's it classified as now? Class 13 Deathworld. The scale only went up to Class 13 before yesterday. We had to create a new category. That seems a bit extreme. Ryan, according to our assessment, Earth's environmental conditions include atmospheric electrical activity that can instantly kill most known life forms, predatory megafauna that hunt in coordinated groups, microscopic organisms that can cause system-wide biological failure, and weather patterns that regularly produce localized apocalyptic events. You mean lightning, pack hunters, bacteria, and storms? Lightning that strikes the planet's surface approximately 100 times per second. Pack hunters that include apex predators with no natural enemies. Bacteria that can adapt to almost any environment and develop resistance to most known countermeasures. Storms that can level cities and spawn tornadoes with wind speeds exceeding most spacecraft. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, that's pretty much Tuesday weather in some places, but you get used to it. Dr. Santos made another note on her datapad. The psychological profile of humanity was turning into a document that read like a horror novel, written by someone with too much imagination and access to real statistical data. There's more, she continued. Our geological survey indicates that Earth's surface is constantly shifting due to tectonic activity, experiences regular volcanic eruptions, and is periodically bombarded by objects from space large enough to cause mass extinction events. Well, sure. That's how planets work, isn't it? I mean, you need geological activity for mountain formation and soil renewal. Volcanoes are just the planet's way of recycling materials, and the asteroid impacts are pretty rare. Only happens every few million years or so. Ryan, most inhabited worlds in the galaxy are specifically chosen because they don't have those characteristics. That seems boring. It seems safe. Same thing. Dr. Santos showed him her datapad, which displayed a comparative analysis of planetary habitability ratings. Earth appeared on the chart as a small red dot in a section labeled Theoretical Upper Limits of Survivable Conditions. According to this analysis, she explained, Earth shouldn't be able to support complex life at all. The fact that it not only supports life but has produced a species that considers its conditions normal is causing some significant revisions to galactic theories about evolution and adaptation. Through the cafeteria window, they could see Commander Thal being gently loaded onto a medical transport. He was stable now, but kept insisting that his environmental suit had achieved consciousness and was trying to communicate with him through status light patterns. Dr. Finn was walking under her own power but required constant supervision after attempting to perform emergency surgery on a lunch tray that she was convinced needed medical attention. Captain. Vor had recovered enough to argue with the medical staff, though his arguments consisted mainly of detailed tactical assessments of how to defeat various pieces of furniture. Lieutenant Kim was visible again but existed in a state of constant mild panic, as if she expected reality to stop working properly at any moment. What happens now? Ryan asked, watching his former teammates being loaded onto ships that would take them to medical facilities where they could recover from their encounter with basic human environmental tolerance. Well, officially, the training program is suspended indefinitely. Unofficially, there are some very interesting conversations happening at the highest levels of galactic government. What kind of conversations? The kind where they discuss whether humanity should be classified as a potential threat or a potential ally, and whether there's actually a difference. Ryan considered this while finishing his sandwich. Are we in trouble? No, actually. You're being offered a treaty. What kind of treaty? The kind where Earth becomes a full member of the Galactic Defense Coalition, with all the benefits and protections that entails. And in exchange, humanity agrees to help with the Void Swarm problem. What's the Void Swarm? Dr. Santos pulled up another file on her datapad. The image showed something that looked like a cross between a space jellyfish and a geometric nightmare, surrounded by what appeared to be the remains of several star systems. They're a hostile alien species that consumes entire solar systems. They've been expanding across the galaxy for the past 1,000 years, and conventional military tactics have been largely ineffective against them. The Coalition has been looking for new approaches to the problem, and they think humans might be helpful. Ryan, they just watched you treat a survival exercise that broke 4 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers as an enjoyable camping trip. The Void Swarm might be dangerous, but they're probably not more dangerous than Earth's weather patterns. That's a good point. When do we start? There's going to be a formal diplomatic process first. Ambassadors, treaties, cultural exchange programs. The whole thing. That sounds complicated. It is. But there's also been a request for an informal consultation first. What kind of consultation? They want to know if you'd be willing to look at some tactical data about the Void Swarm and give them your opinion on possible strategies. Ryan wiped his hands on his napkin and stood up. Sure, I can take a look. Do they have coffee where we're going? I'm sure they can arrange something. As they walked toward the transport ships that would take them to Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters, Ryan looked back at Mortis 7 one last time. It had been a good visit, even if it had ended earlier than expected. The local wildlife was interesting. The geological formations were unique, and he'd managed to get some decent fishing in. By the way, he said as they boarded the ship, I never did get to see that volcano I heard about. Is there any chance we could stop by here again sometime? Dr. Santos looked at him for a long moment, then made a note that she marked as priority. Discuss human recreational preferences with Diplomatic Corps before formal first contact. We'll see what we can arrange, she said. The transport lifted off from Mortis 7, carrying them toward a galaxy that was still trying to figure out what to do with a species that treated interstellar warfare as a logical extension of weekend camping trips. Behind them, the planet's screaming winds and carnivorous rocks continued their eternal hostility. Completely unaware that they had just failed to impress the galaxy's newest apex predators. In the ship's galley, Ryan Walsh found the coffee machine and started figuring out how to make it produce something that tasted like home. Outside the porthole, space stretched out in all directions, filled with new worlds to explore, new challenges to face, and new friends to meet. He was looking forward to it.